Welcome back, freshman global studies. Hope all is well. Try to churn out. We got 4 total parts here. You already got 2 of them. This is going to be part 3 of the Age of Enlightenment. Again, I'm just building up the context. I know it's a lot of information. I know this isn't the most enjoyable part of it, but I do want you to know that I find this stuff interesting, especially the more you get to know it. There's a lot of life lessons you can apply this stuff to your own life from these individuals of the past. There's a lot of cool stories that I'm just scratching the surface of. But hope all is well. Stay safe, stay healthy, most importantly. And then hopefully you guys are finding the time to get into this. Expect you guys to take notes off of this and make sure that you're doing the best you can to, I guess, keep up. So we're going to get into, we ended the last one. We looked at the Age of Reformation. We looked at the Renaissance. And again, we see these things, they overlap, they kind of come around the same time period. But again, this discovery of self, this humanism, this improvement of ourselves is going to lead to people starting to question, starting to observe, start to look at the world around them much differently than they did in the past. So we're going to start here and look at the scientific revolution. And this is going to kind of be the focus on of changing the world around us, understanding the world around us. And it's kind of this reckless search for truth. And it's an inspiration. Like, you folks should be recklessly searching for information, truth, and ways to apply information in your own life to enhance it, whatever that may be, whatever pursuit that may be. And this scientific revolution can be early on kind of pursued by amateurs, but it's going to lead to this exploration and understand the world around us. And again, we could look at the discovery of the quote-unquote new world, how that will lead to opening different questions and wondering, again, why isn't this new world in the Bible? And people questioning, what is in the Bible? What did they really know? Is this absolute truth? And people start to question religion again. And, the scientific revolution is kind of that willingness to admit that we do not know, that we're ignoramuses, that we're ignorant. So we first have to admit we do not know. And it kind of goes back to that Socrates. He was the wisest man because he's the only one who admit that I know nothing at all. The only thing I know is nothing at all. So this is kind of the scientific revolution. Try to put a quote on it. That'd be a good quote I think you could put on it. And it's not really a revolution of pursuing knowledge. It's a revolution against ignorance. And, human beings are trying to answer more important questions. And again, willingness to admit they do not know. And it's kind of it pits experiment, science, empiricism, and rationalism against religious dogma and superstitions and maybe some irrationality. So it's kind of that combat here between the two. But it's not all anti-religion, really. It's more of, and we'll see some people argue, by understanding Earth more, by understanding the clouds, the trees, and the cobwebs more, as I mentioned in the last one, we're able to maybe understand God's creation more. So some people argue it was a pious thing to do, it was a religious thing to do to kind of answer these questions and tackle this. Now, what they're really going to focus on is using math to solve problems in science. And, they're using these the math and numbers to get facts. And this is a nice little brain tease here, nice little riddle you can try to solve if you would like. And you're looking at, again, it's with math and it's observation. But again, people start to question the church, they question the world around them. And again, they want to start understanding why things are the way they are. And, we see not just men, but women are swept up in this new craze of questioning things around them. And, if we're looking at the scientific revolution, most of it gets credit for the 16th, 17th centuries, a little bit of the 18th century, but it's really something that we use all the way up to the modern day. It doesn't really go away. We're still asking questions. Look at right now. We're trying to tackle coronavirus. We're using science to try to combat this. We're using, observation. We're experimenting. We're finding ways to maybe slow this down. So, you see people, whether they're, I read something in that book I was reading, I told you guys, but they'll put larks in a jar, put it over top, and see how they'll prove that oxygen is vital to survival, because the bird will suffocate to death within that. So we see that this is the scientific revolution As I mentioned, amateurs are playing with it. You can see Benjamin Franklin; he'd be considered an amateur that are testing electricity. As I mentioned, a lot of people superstitious that lightning bolts, thunderstorms, droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, all were sent from God as a means to send a message to punish. But again, people want to start exploring. They're going to start to question, and we can see, as I mentioned, Benjamin Franklin. He's going to disarm the gods. Thor here with the experiment of the lightning bolt. Now, Benjamin Franklin was somebody, who just asked, what is electricity? And, we have the kite experiment, which I'd like to know more about, look into, but he's really celebrated in Western Europe, which plays a role in the coming American Revolution. This guy is respected by Western Europe, especially in France. And, he's somebody who writes the Poor Richard's Almanac, and it just talks about human progress and how to improve your own life. And he's accepted into London's Royal Society of Philosophical Transactions Club, and he's somebody who is revered over there. But again, we have other people that are experimenting. They're experimenting with electricity as amateurs, and having charging a woman up with electricity and having a man try to kiss her and getting shocked. And it's just, again, we see people exploring and questioning, and they're curious. And that's how you grow in life. You're curious about something and then start to pursue that, start to investigate. Now, if we're looking at maybe where this scientific revolution, again, it's not really I don't want to say there's a starting point. Most people say it starts with Newton and his release of his book. But we can start to look back here when, again, questioning the church. The church always said this earth center of the universe. They looked at the past Greek philosophers or Greek astronomers like Aristotle, like Ptolemy, and a Ptolemaic model, also known as the geocentric model, where the earth was believed to be the center of the universe. The church would reinforce that, the clergy, the priests. But there's a guy by the name of Copernicus who's from Poland, again, Polish city over there, who is going to find that that's not true. And in 1543, so you're looking at 16th century, Copernicus is going to release a book that talks about the solar system. And he's going to show that the universe was not revolving around the earth, but it goes around the sun. And that, it's the earth that's the center of the universe. And again, if this is true, what does the church really know? And people start to maybe question the church. This is why, again, the church, who will back the Ptolemaic model, and actually Copernicus will get off kind of scot-free, but his work, this heliocentric model, the sun is the center of the universe, there's a visual of it, is going to be passed on to Galileo. And Galileo is going to be somebody who is going to pick up that, and he's going to have, improve something called a telescope that we know can look up into space. But Copernicus really, it leads to a kind of paradigm shift. You call it the Copernican revolution, and it's just this breakaway from something that was always supposedly true and now is untrue. It'd just be a very drastic change in accepting that. And again, opens a can of worms that the heliocentric model, the Earth's not the center of the universe, the church is wrong. What else are they wrong about? But anyway, Galileo, he's going to be somebody who improves that telescope. And professors are going to be teaching the Ptolemaic geocentric model. Galileo will be the guy who says, no, look through this telescope. I will show you that that's not true, and kind of reinforce the heliocentric model. Professors in his universities are looking through this. So I challenge you to look through a telescope on something. Find a way to change your views on something in life that you're curious about and discover more. Now, Galileo, speaking of discovery, he's going to discover the Milky Way. And he's going to realize it's made up of a numberless stars. He'll see the surface of the moon, the satellites of Jupiter. And again, this is going to lead to some changes, and it's challenging the church. He'll actually be put under house arrest by the church. He'll be threatened to be killed if he does not recant. And that's something, again, we see. Thanks to these guys, looking at space, looking at the universe, by 1780, a couple centuries after, maybe their death or a century or two, you're going to see the known solar system has doubled in size. And, we begin to, again, question things out there. Now, speaking of questioning, or speaking of, scientific revolution, Rene Descartes, he gets some credit. He's actually the father of geometry. If you guys like geometry, if you hate geometry, here's a guy to hate. And he argues that truth is an optical illusion, much like this. These are actually straight lines, but they don't look like it because of the black and the white. But he says, accept nothing as absolute truth, that we need to strip away all our preconceptions before we can acquire knowledge. And that's just something I think is profound. And again, guys like this who are coming up with these ideas, challenging people to question things, is going to create a questioning of first the world around them, but then eventually we see a questioning of the kings and queens. So this is like a domino effect here, going at cause and effect. And some two quotes I think are very powerful, and again, life lessons. One quote is Descartes gets credit for is, I think, therefore I am. So you must believe in yourself. You must be confident to achieve what you want in life. So please make sure you take note of that. And then conquer yourself rather than the world. You know, again, get to know thyself. And this is why we did the coat of arms. We can thank Descartes for us doing the coat of arms. Get in touch with ourselves. Get to know ourselves. Now, the father of the scientific method, this is Francis Bacon. You know, he believed that, you know, human beings need to investigate. We need to experiment. He believed that it was actually a religious thing to do, as I mentioned before. It was religious. It was pious to look into and understand the world we live in, because then we have a better understanding of God's creation and we give more respect towards God. So again, this is him walking that tightrope of science and religion and how they can kind of go hand in hand. You know, he hoped man would achieve power over nature, and if we do that, we can live happier, healthier, and longer lives. And you know, he wanted to improve science and his scientific method because he saw the benefits of how it could lead to a better harvest, more crops, more food. There was this thing called a Malthusian trap. The more people we had would actually, we can never have an overpopulation, because if we had too many people, we couldn't make enough food for them. And that was a Malthusian trap. Every time we had a population increase, we would actually have a lot of deaths because there wasn't enough mouths to feed. There's too many mouths to feed for the sake of food. So we look here, he wants to solve that problem. He wants to improve trade, he wants to improve navigation, and again, he wants to use science as a means to do so, Francis Bacon. Now, this guy you could argue is the father of the scientific revolution. He gets credit with his writing of the mathematical principles of natural philosophy, which was released in 1687. So you could argue that the scientific revolution started in 1687 with Newton. And again, it all depends on what you want to argue. That's history for you. But we have to look at Newton. Time and place, again, is important looking at history. He's born in a time, he's born actually the same year that Galileo dies. So that was interesting, 1642. You know, he wasn't viewed as a genius. He was viewed as absent-minded. His mind was always somewhere else. And he's actually going to be sent home. He's going to go home to a place called Lincolnshire in England to escape the Black Death, which was rampaging, you know, and just like in the coronavirus today, going through cities, urban areas more so than rural areas, because people are living closer together. So he's going to go to his home. He's going to do a lot of this thinking. He puts himself in this kind of mindset where he's going to continue to improve. And that was age 22 years old. And again, he's considered that great mind. But we have to look at also when he leaves that house, he's also in a place and time where the coffee houses have taken root. And you guys read about that these coffee houses are kind of an incubator for promoting new ideas and building on those and surrounding yourself with people. This is a guy who quoted that the only reason I see so far is I stand on the shoulders of giants. And this is Newton. And, you know, he's somebody who is going to, you know, be all about using math and science and, you know, finding ways to, you know, question the world and improve the world we live in. So there's Newton, you know, the laws of gravity, you know, optical light, law of white light, and he's going to help improve the telescope. He hates publicity. He actually has a, I believe, a mental breakdown eventually. You know, he's somebody who's thinking that he's being persecuted. So 1690s, he suffers that. Just somebody who's very complex. Again, somebody I'd like to know more about, get to know more about. Now, we're switching over from the scientific revolution, the observing, questioning, how do we improve the world we live in, to how do we improve the governments. Now, this guy's a good kind of good symbol of why we're going to question governments. You're looking at Louis XV. His son will be the one who gets actually beheaded in the French Revolution. But this is a king. And, you know, these guys, these kings and queens and aristocracy, these are the rich people, they are too busy to pay any attention to a lot of these ideas. Many of them are that are spreading throughout Europe, and they think that they're apples and oranges to who they are, but you're going to see that these apples may overthrow the oranges if they don't change their ways. King Louis XV would have 2,000 courtiers who would be around to keep him entertained. He's somebody who is going to be a womanizer. And, after a few years of marriage, he's going to have all kinds of romance with different women. So he's abusing his power. He actually had a relationship with 3 different sisters. And he's somebody who's flaunting his wealth and flaunting his power. But we need to understand, if these kings and queens don't get in line, if they don't find ways to start taking care of the people, they're going to be overthrown. So this despotism, this absolute rule despotism is what it means. These governments are going to be questioned, and they're questioned at a time and an age called Enlightenment. So if the Reformation questions the church, scientific revolution questions the world we live in, Enlightenment is going to question the kings and the governments, and are they in our social conditions as well? How do we improve our social conditions? So this Enlightenment is also known as the Age of Reason. And it's going to be something that gets credit for England and France will be home for the home for Enlightenment. This is where the power of the coffee houses, you can make the argument, which we're going to get into here in a moment. And this kind of begins this intellectual climate that will spread from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean to America, North America, South America, and other parts of the world. So we can see that this is revolutionary ideas that we still live with today. We can thank Enlightenment, and this concept of happiness in the moment, in here and now. And there's a book out there by Spencer Johnson called The Precious Present. This really sums up Enlightenment to me. That this idea of that we can find joy in the moment, and not in some heavenly future. So there's this push for progress towards a better world, and again, it takes a foothold, and it kind of awakens the West. And to understand Enlightenment and religion, there's not that much conflict, but a lot of these people are deists. They don't believe in a God is part of them. We'll get into that here in a moment, that God is involved in everything we do. A lot of these people, then eventually you see the pendulum swinging further, and you see some atheists start popping up, which I think you guys understand. Now, ideas that stem from Enlightenment are things we use in America today. This idea of freedom of speech. It's going to lead to the abolishment of slavery. We have the 3 branches of power: separation of power, balance of power, and we have democracy as a result. This power to the people, which again, beforehand, power was to the few, to the one. Sometimes in these absolute monarchs. So, as a result of Enlightenment, we have these things. Now, I think Enlightenment is timeless. A lot of these ideas stretch through time, and this, in my opinion, kind of sums it up. It's about improving ourselves, our conditions, our situations, and it's timeless. It's still around us today. So enlighten yourself. Now, as you guys hopefully understand, one of our standards for this unit, or for this year, that is the state asks, is making sure we see, first off, examples of and opportunities to examine alternative courses of action, that kind of different cause and effects, but also that historians develop a thesis, an argument, and they use evidence to support it. And you folks got exposed to looking at sources and looking at secondary source, but the coffee houses. And historians argued because water was so dangerous to drink with typhoid fever and cholera outbreaks, and all these diseases and sicknesses, and you'd have all kinds of thousands and people dying, especially around these cities. This contaminated water, many people turned to beer and alcohol as a way of killing some of the bacteria. And this led a lot of people, as I mentioned, peasants would drink a gallon of beer or wine per day. And it just shows us maybe a lot of Europeans, a lot of people were living in this drunken haze. And when we have coffee, we see people waking up from that drunken haze. And people start to observe and they start to question the world that they live in. People start to, find ways to improve, the conditions they live in. And we see the coffee houses. Coffee actually comes out of the Middle Eastern region. And it's going to promote that. Once it comes to Europe, it's going to promote those coffee shops and people making money off those coffee shops and people hanging around those coffee shops. And you saw they were very specialized in what they were delivering. So we see coffee. And again, we can see our own country. We can look at Starbucks, founded in Seattle. And we can see Microsoft, the coffee houses, maybe leading to the founding of Microsoft, Amazon. That's one of the advantages too. Living in a city, you're going to have more ideas to maybe improve life. So if you ever want to be an inventor, tinkerer, being in a city would not be a bad idea. Now, we see that these new ideas will lead people questioning the church, which we saw the Reformation do. Nothing new there. And we're also going to see people challenge the norms, and they're going to challenge status and the status quo. And those people who challenge early on, just understand these philosophers or philosophers we're going to get into here. We need to remind ourselves these guys are like nuts at the time. But eventually you're going to have a first follower, but followed by a second follower, much like the Dance with Shirt guy there. That's going to lead to other people joining this movement. That'll eventually lead to the topple of kings in the democratic system that we have. So if we're looking at this Enlightenment movement, and really, I mean, these philosophers, even today, if we have people who are questioning things around us, they're not a coherent movement, not just organized one kind of cell body, but they're multiple. They do not always think alike, but they're radical intellectuals. Many of these guys, if you look at these philosophers we're talking about, most of them, or many of them, are deists. They don't believe in miracles. They don't believe, many of them don't even believe there's a God at all. They believe that understanding the world around us is by looking through science, not religion. And again, they're about observation, experimentation, not dogma or superstitions. And many of them are against organized religions, and are also more so against arbitrary governments that just give power to those who are born in a certain family with a certain last name. They want laws that protect each commoner, each person. Many of them do. And those who do believe in a God, they believe God set up the world, but left it for ourselves. And this is where you kind of see the clash between science and religion with these philosophers. So taking these ideas from, the scientific revolution, applying them to their own religious views. And this is maybe where we see the hostility between the philosophers and their followers and the church. And this clash between religion and science, again, which comes about from the scientific revolution. And some of these guys are hostile towards organized religions. And, these ideas that come from Enlightenment is going to lead to enlightened despots. A despot is a ruler with absolute power. An enlightened despot, here's your definition. These are monarchs who actually take in some of these enlightened ideas and apply them to their ruling of government. And, for those who didn't, there'd be maybe more risk of rebellion. So, and there's some who even did open the kind of the pop bottle somewhat a little bit. It could lead to revolution as well. So, we understand that Europe is heading towards revolution. There's a lot of changes coming, and those who try to stop it could be overrun. Now, as I mentioned, many are hostile towards maybe religion, organized Christianity. They believe in a freedom of speech. They believe in a freedom of religion. They believe in the freedom of press, personal freedom to pursue those things. And as I mentioned, many of these philosophers are deists, D-E-I-S-T-S. And this is kind of the metaphor is for a deist is they believe that God was like a watchmaker. They make the watch, but then they walk away. They let the clock and the mechanization of the watch work itself. And this is kind of the belief of these deists that God made Earth and he kind of and made humans. So they believe in a God, but they believe that he does not have miracles, doesn't get involved. And one of their arguments of why they don't believe in miracles, because a miracle is God getting divine and God getting involved, which means then maybe God made a mistake. And that's what the deists believe, that he's admitting he made a mistake, and God is perfect, so he doesn't make mistakes. So this is the argument by deists, that God does not intervene. These guys believe themselves as rational and educated, and guys like Voltaire, he'll be a deist early in life, at least his 30s. He doesn't tell anybody, though, until he's in his 70s that he's a deist. He doesn't write about it, at least, because even people who were deists, they didn't really openly maybe write about it because they would not get the fame and the glory from, because most people today, they still believe wholly in God and miracles and intervention and all that stuff. Now the pendulum will actually swing even further to the left and from deist, and even believe in atheism, and people don't believe in God at all. And this is kind of we can see this fire kind of spreading, and again, people questioning whether God is involved, or questioning organized religion, and those things. Now, we also looked at this Enlightenment. We understand that this is going to actually enhance power of women, especially in France. And rarely have women in history wielded so much obvious power. And I believe women have more power than history books give them credit for. I think they're doing a lot of things behind the scenes. They're the motivation for many of these men dictating some historical events. So we understand that. In Enlightenment France, though, Enlightenment's looking at the 18th century primarily, and with the 18th century, and then even in the 19th century, you're looking at, the French argue everything depends on the woman, and aristocratic women especially. These are the higher class, socioeconomic class, So we look here, and these women, there'll be something that, have a lot of power. Toilette is where a lot of these women will get, prettied up, and they get a lot of makeup. French women were known for putting a lot of makeup on, dressed to the nine. And these toilettes, you see toilet there, these toilettes, these are a public affair. Women are getting dressed up, and their husbands and lovers and maids and hairdressers and friends all gather around, exchange gossip, new and old gossip. Marriage in Enlightenment France was not really a monogamous relationship. There was a lot of affairs going on, and marriage did not interfere with that. Montesquieu, we'll talk about him, and he made a quote that a man who wanted to keep a woman to himself would be regarded as a disturber to society, a disturber to peace. So we see this kind of freedom, this sexual freedom for women in the day, this Enlightenment era. So we're loosening that kind of Victorian age, which will be later on, but you see that women are maybe lashing out, opening up more so in society. And marital separation in France, I thought this was interesting, only required a wife to arrange her husband to slap her in the face twice. I'm sorry, slap her in the face once before two witnesses. So I thought that was interesting as well. Another place where we'd have these congregations, and women again were considered more equal to men in France, not in England. You guys saw that in the coffee houses. Women were allowed to be in the coffee houses in France. They were not allowed to be in the coffee houses in England. So we can see the difference of culture there. The salon was another place that people would go, and they would go and just have conversations and work on hone in their discussions and their beliefs. So these things, theaters were another place where actors and actresses would go, and people would go and congregate around. Again, we see that maybe the more money being circulated at the time, and the king sometimes would walk across the stage. We see music as a place in this Enlightenment era, the 18th century, especially second half of the 18th century. Europe was swept up by this rising of musical activity. More and more people had more time on their hands to listen to this stuff. And again, more people were living and moving towards cities, which we're going to get into the next unit with industrialization. And we have this new invention in the 1750s in Italy, and it's the piano. And it could play louder than other instruments, and it gradually becomes more popular. And you'll have the first concert held in London in 1767, and this thing was very expensive. So it's only for the rich classes, the upper elites. And like Thomas Jefferson, for example, he actually got one of the first pianos ever transported to America. I thought that was interesting, in 1771. So you're looking at 5 years before, or 4 years really, before the revolution kicks off. You're going to see he purchases one for his fiancée at the time, Martha Skelton, and brings that over. So I thought that was cool. And then you see this music of the century, though. You see more people going to operas, and women, especially in France, dressing their hair all up, dressed fantastically and boldly. One lady, for example, had like a replica of a famous warship with all the guns woven into her hair and the riggings from the ship. And music is abstract, and these people are born into this new culture and this art. and it's an incubator. It's for innovation. And again, we're going to be getting an industrial revolution. It's all about invention. And again, we're getting in a time right now where people are questioning the government. These abstract music, art, all that stuff. So people will eventually, like televisions today, they're a lot cheaper than they were when they first came out, especially big screens, flat screens, you know, HD TV. So we see this. We see eventually these things become cheaper, and it opens up music to amateurs. And again, helps spread. Now, men of music, you got Bach, you know, who wasn't famous in his lifetime. He's from Germany, but he becomes famous later. And he wrote a lot of religious music, so you can see that. And he writes a song called, which one it is here? It's Coffee Katana, and I think that was, it sounded pretty. Let's see if this is it here. I'll keep this on to keep you engaged here. So we go on here. We talked about the coffee houses. You know, it's something that helps bring order and organization to these ideas. They're specialized. It leads to the #1 insurance company in the world, starting in a coffee shop, 1771. Leads to life insurance. We have the book Wealth of Nations we're going to talk about here is going to be written here. And we start seeing these puzzle pieces that were disorganized get pieced together. And, you know, we start to question the world we live in. You know, the Paris coffee house I mentioned were open to women. Voltaire was known for drinking dozens a day. And the French were censored, and there were spies in there more so than the English. Now, going on here, we're looking at Hobbes. He's a guy who believed that the Bible was like any other book, and he did not. He said Moses, the Old Testament, could not have been the sole author of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, because he claims, since the last of these describes his death, it couldn't have been written just by Moses if he was able to tell when he dies. But he believes people are born evil. And society, we need a strong central government, because society is going to protect us from ourselves, because people are born evil. So we need a strong government. He believes in that. He wanted a strong central government, and he believes science has no limits. Now, his antonym, his opponent, would be somebody named John Locke, who believed we were born good. We're good by nature, and he believed that you know, we get our knowledge through our experiences. So again, we're born with this blank slate, going back to Aristotle, tabula rasa, is what John Locke argued. We're born with this blank slate, and this idea that we need to experience, and that's something you need, again, life lesson, experience, so you can gain confidence and knowledge when you're out here in the world. Now, he believes that, you know, the social contract, that the government is in a contract with the people, that we need to give up some of our, the government needs to protect our natural rights, which are life, liberty, and property. We're all born with these. They're natural, out of birth. If the government fails to protect that, we need to overthrow the government. Now, this guy, he encourages tolerance of religious minorities. He is somebody who does not believe we can trust atheists because they don't believe in God. But he's also somebody who's going to set the foundation for us. He's kind of our, you could argue, our father of the United States when it comes to our political system, because he believes in democracy, the power of the people, that the government should serve the people, not vice versa. And we know Thomas Jefferson, where does he get life, liberty from? In Pursuit of Happiness, Declaration of Independence. He's stealing those things from Locke, John Locke. So that's John Locke. Here's a guy by the name of Blaise Pascal. I thought this is interesting. He believes in the power of imagination. Please make sure dress for success, because when you dress up, people find you more credible and are more willing to follow you. So if you're looking to maybe grow as a individual, hold on one second, and get power, make sure you guys dress the part. But Blaise Pascal, why I have this, it's called Pascal's Wager. You look at the chart here, he was somebody who's a devout religious man, and he argues those atheists who don't believe that God exists, he comes up with this chart. If you ever look into it, I don't need to go in depth with it. It essentially says bet on God. So there's somebody who's going to be not a deist, not a atheist, but somebody who's a devout religious man. Now, we have Rousseau. This guy is going to be somebody, liberty, equality, and fraternity, he says. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. And it'll become the battle cry of the French Revolution. And he is somebody who believes in nature. It's civilization that corrupts. It's society that corrupts human beings, that we're born good, we're born pure. And he's somebody who says man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. And if we look here, that's going to be a line that Karl Marx, the guy on the right for communism, is going to use in the 1800s. So not too long after Rousseau. And, you know, he is somebody who Rousseau called for a radical change. And it's, again, this is going to take place especially in the French Revolution. And again, he believes society corrupts man. He's also maybe all agreed that children at the time, upper class children, were treated, dressed like an adult, and were treated like toys. They were very impersonally. They very scarcely saw their parents. Their parents would actually give them to a wet nurse, and then they would hand them over to a governess, and they were taught manners, somebody within the house. They stayed away from the parents. And then age 5, they were put into a convent, and then they weren't taken out till 15 and pushed into marriage. So he actually argues children should be naturally developed. They should promote their gifts, their strengths. That's what we should do with you. You should be promoting your strengths. What are you good at? Keep building off of those. And a lot of people are going to follow Rousseau's message actually for parenthood, motherhood, fatherhood. Next guy, Voltaire. He believes in freedom of religion. He also believes in freedom of speech. We're going to take Voltaire's arguments, and he believes in questioning the world that we live in. And he pronounced that certainty, going back to Descartes, is absurd. We need to doubt every fact and challenge all authority. And the government should be limited, but speech should be unlimited. And he thought science and education would lead to material and moral progress. And the French Revolution actually takes place 11 years after his death. And they're going to use a lot of his ideas again to do so. And this guy, as I mentioned, was a deist. And he used reason over superstition. Here's Montesquieu. He's a philosopher who came up with 3 branches of government, and he believed despotism right here was bad. That's an absolute rule. Instead, he thought power corrupts, so we need to have different branches of government. Our separation of powers, again, something we use in the United States today. Beccaria. This guy wants to end cruel and unusual punishment. Beccaria. And the torture and people were treated horribly in prison. I have over here, gambling was something that was very popular, and if you couldn't pay your debts, you went in debtor's prison. And prisons at this time were a prototype of hell. They're crowded, they're diseased, they are a lucrative business for jailers because prisoners had to actually pay money for their own food and lodgings. And then juvenile offenders, so somebody like yourself, Sage, petty thieves and debtors were placed in the same cell as in the insane and murderers. So I thought that was something interesting. And it's just a time at this time, people, heads would still be put on spikes and pikes, and it's just something that was, I don't know, some modern standards we look at and say, ugh. London sightseers would actually go on tours through the prisons, and they would walk through, and this is kind of capturing this, and they would look at the insane, and they'd laugh at them, and it was like a place of entertainment to go check out these people and walk through here. And the people's belief for the mentally afflicted, those who are mentally insane, that they were not curable, that they were insensitive to hunger, thirst, cold, and pain. So they were ill-fed, they were ill-clothed, and they were cruelly treated. So this is Beccaria. He's trying to challenge this barbarous nature of these prisons. It wasn't just men. We also have Mary Wollstonecraft. She's ahead of her time. She actually argues for women's equality, that women should be at a equal to men, and they are superheroes essentially. She actually dies in childbirth, giving birth to Mary Shelley, who was actually the author of Frankenstein. I thought that was interesting. She actually had that during a nightmare, staying at it was Lord Acton's palatial estate. She had a nightmare and she thought of Frankenstein. She wrote the book. Now this guy takes all these ideas I just mentioned and takes all these engineers and scientists and mechanics and innovators and doctors and architects and actually compiles these things in a book. It actually comes out first in 1751, and it'll have multiple different editions over time, and it's the encyclopedia. And you can see it there. The first volume, 1751. Over the next 21 years, 1772 is going to have multiple new editions, 11 different volumes. It has 3,000 pages of illustrations, and it's something that gathers all this information and puts it in one spot and allows doctors to look at it, scientists and industrialists and the trade guilds. And again, it loosens the monopoly on these secret processes. And again, we can see all these different editions. We see the power of the printing press. And at first the book was suppressed and his life was in danger. But again, later on, it goes on. Now, there's something known in psychology as the Diderot effect. He actually got a brand new rug from the Queen. You can tie this in your own life as well. And he needs, with the rug, he's like, oh man, I need a nice chair. When he gets a nice chair, he says, I need nice curtains. The Diderot effect is once you get something nice, it tends to domino effect, leads you to buy some other things. So that's that. Now, 1776, something crazy happens. I'm not going to talk about the American Revolution. Instead, I'm going to talk about a book comes out, not the signing of the Declaration of Independence. We'll get to that with the American Revolution. Will be part 4. But we see here, 1776, there was a system where mercantilism, where people thought that money was finite, that it was limited, and people would, as a result, countries would hoard all these precious metals, and they would shut down skilled workers from leaving their country and trying to protect these ideas and these things. And you understand, dating back to the 16th century, we do see this change, from this slow change from this concepts of barter and this land-based wealth. And we start seeing more money and capital. And capital means money. Capitalism is about pursuit of money and allowing that money to work for you. And we see this, that, you know, we have this economic boom in the 16th century, which precedes what I'm going to talk about here, 1776. But you start seeing merchants, they start to rise up the social class. They start to gain status. They start to make more money. And these guys are actually celebrated in Western Europe, going out in these places and actually doing business. It's going to lead to a great boom in developing many of the business institutions we have today, like stock exchanges, the credit, bank deposits, and we start actually seeing these band of merchants pull their resources together to form companies and make money. And we see this kind of here. This is a famous painting. Acquisitive Burgers, as it's called, is looking at how this money, we see a shift in this capitalist kind of society where this guy's actually taken her away from looking at the Bible. So we see money maybe over religion here. Is a nice little subtle clue here what's going on. And we can probably tackle some other things in this painting. But again, we see people shifting their focus to making money over religion, focused on worrying about the present over the afterlife. For better and worse. So we see that. Now, this kind of sets the stage for this guy who's going to begin writing a book. It takes him 10 years to write. It's called The Wealth of Nations. And this is the dude of capitalism, Adam Smith. And he's one of the greatest economic minds in the history of the world. And he argues that people act out of self-interest. It's our strongest trait. And the best way to kind of go back to that Machiavelli, the best way to get what somebody else wants is to give them what they want. To get what you want is to give somebody else what they want. And, he argues that man is the animal that makes bargains. He argues for specialization. And he believes that the king of one is better than jack of all trades. He argues, it's a division of labor, that one man doing, one specialized part, or 10 men doing each a specialized part, will lead to mass production. And this is stuff we're going to take and use in Western Europe and eventually the United States. And this fact that people act out of self-interest, and what he argues is, we have this idea, if you go buy a Big Mac, McDonald's wants your money more than they want the Big Mac, and you want the Big Mac more than you want the money. So this is that exchange, and this is supply and demand is controlled by that. Now, there was this belief in this Bible verse, rich person entering the kingdom of heaven was like a camel going through the eye of a needle. Smith argues that greed is actually good. It's a good thing because greed leads to improvement, pursuing those things. People get what they want. And he also believes that the rich are awesome because they're able to give back. And also, if a business makes a lot of money, they're going to hire more people. And they're going to help provide those guys a livelihood and those people a livelihood. And he believes greed and pursuing money is good. It improves society. It benefits society, not just the self. And it leads to new inventions, and it leads to growth in an economic system, a country. So this is his belief in this idea called capitalism. And supply and demand is controlled by an invisible hand. It does not need government intervention. And he argues a shoemaker who makes shoes, makes money, is going to hire more shoemakers to make more shoes and provide more. And again, what controls supply is how many people demand it. So you don't need a government to tell him how many shoes to make. He's going to make enough to meet the demand to maximize his profits. So that's and we kind of see this growth of a middle class, who can afford these products. Now, laissez-faire is at the backbone of capitalism. This is where the government is hands off. That the government does not need to get involved. This is going to be something that you need to make sure you jot down, that people believe. Less is more when it comes to government interaction. Adam Smith did not believe that fully. He gets blamed for saying that, but he doesn't really believe that fully. He believes that the government, there's certain things they need to regulate, they need to get involved in, because if not, they'll be taken advantage of. And we do see early on, though, when we get to the Industrial Revolution, they're going to follow this laissez-faire. The government's going to be hands-off, allow business owners to make the decisions, which will lead to the exploitation and taking advantage of workers. Now, if there's mass unemployment, this guy's kicking back. This is the government over here. Even though the people are freaking out, the government's kicked back. That's laissez-faire. They're lazy. Got their feet up. Another word for capitalism is market economy, or a couple words. And again, supply and demand does not need government intervention. That's the invisible hand will dictate how much is produced and all that. Now, Adam Smith argues that we need to make sure we invest, and this is something you can tie in yourself. Trust. Investment comes from trusting that the future will be better. Credit came from because if we give somebody credit, we understand that tomorrow's gonna be better than today. And this is why I'm borrowing money. This is why I'm giving somebody money, because I think tomorrow will give me more than today. And this, when we get out of the dark ages and we see credit coming about because we see progress, this is investing. And understand that your money is working 24/7 when you invest. So find ways to invest now. Wish I would invest at your age. Make that money work for you. And if we look at the power of credit, if you want to see the power of credit in your own life or in the world, countries without credit, like Iraq or Syria right now is in a civil war, they can't get money. If you can't get money, you can't invest it. You can't get that money working for you. And more money makes more money. And if you're going to develop the infrastructure of a country, you need to be able to borrow money. That credit rating is important. If you want to look at a website, look up credit rating countries, and you will see who the poorest countries are, and those countries will stay poor because they're unable to borrow money because they don't have the trust in paying these places back. Now, because of Adam Smith's ideas, where we see this capitalism, this supply and demand, we see actually people in frock coats and top hats actually exceed and take the power from kings and queens, those absolute monarchs. We will see empires built by bankers and merchants. You can see the top hat, the frock coat. You're looking at our boy Rockefeller here, and you're seeing that these guys will be the ones who are able to take the power away from the kings and nobles, and we see this shift to where we have today. So that's Adam Smith. These Enlightenment ideas are going to lead to a dawn of a new age. We're going to get into with part 4, the last part of this series. That's going to be talking about this revolutions that are coming, these overthrows of the government. And there's about 20 slides left, 30 slides left, and I'll finish that up, like I said, in part 4. Thank you for bearing with me.